an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Clariel, chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Complications and opportunities, old secrets, new plans, to the islet, out of the bottle, and the education of a berserk. In these chapters, Cargrin explains to Clariel some of what is going on. And it turns out things are a little bit more dire than I realized. It's all happened very quickly. And Clariel isn't as pure a protagonist as I think we are used to. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So, first of all, of course, I want to thank Yama for commissioning this episode. Yama is in the chat here with Abby. Welcome to both of you. And secondly, I want to say how totally excited I am by the developments of these chapters. There is so much that gets dropped here. I have been just really loving this book. I just I think that there's something about, having the Sabriel and Leoriel and Abhorsen that all really felt like they were following a similar pattern. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. But I kind of came into this book expecting that pattern again, just the way that you do. And it looks like we're just not getting that. And I am interested. I feel like this author, there's a feeling to this of him getting to stretch out more. And I am wondering if he felt constrained by the pattern that he had set for himself. If he was being asked by publishers for more of the same and he felt like he couldn't really do what he wanted. Or if this is a result of him simply growing as a writer and having more and bigger ideas and wanting to explore those in a way that wasn't even on his mind before. There's so many things that can happen. I think back to the beginnings of me doing the podcast and what I do now. And there is so much to the way I handle stuff that just didn't even occur to me, so it might just be a natural progression of skill and imagination. So anyway, okay, let's start off with chapter 8, complications and opportunities. So Clariel, to recap, was just knocked the fuck out in the middle of a berserk rage at the end of the last chapter by her teacher, who had been trying to test her using charter magic and trying to get her to use charter magic in kind to defend herself, which she did not do. She has no ability. It's she can basically, she has a link to the charter. She can do very, very basic magic. She doesn't have a lot of strength behind it. And it's not something that has stuck with her. She has had some lessons before, and we'll see later in other chapters that there are spells for healing and things that she's been taught that she just does not remember. And what's so interesting about the difference between Clariel and let's just talk about Leoriel. Leoriel used charter marks in her time at the library to defeat the Stilken, I think was what it was called, that she didn't even know. And these charter marks just sort of came out of her. Now, it's unclear whether she got access to those marks because she was holding the disreputable dog, which she had stolen. And it might be that the disreputable dog, even in statue form, was somehow aiding her magic and giving her access to knowledge that she didn't realize she even had. But there's a sense for me of if you have this innate ability that you can tap into the charter and it will help you. It will be responsive in a way that's much more intuitive. And it feels as if either Clariel as if either the charter doesn't have the same reaction to Clariel for some reason, and we find out what that reason may be, or Clariel maybe does not trust the charter enough to reach into it in the way other characters have. And it's unclear, but I think it may be the former. It could be the combo. So she wakes up again, and Kargren is sitting there and he's having her like kind of held down a little bit because she is about to reach for her weapon, which they definitely try. Like they are aware she's going to come back to consciousness fighting, so they're ready for that. Oh, Abby has a comment. I think Clariel only used charter marks she didn't know when she brought the dog to life, and she defeated the Stilk, and I think she knew the charter marks. She just would never have dared to use them unless, as it was a matter of life and death. Oh, okay. Because there was like a mark that I thought as she was escaping and she seals the door behind her, that there's a mark that like she didn't even know of, that she shouts, and that's the one that like sort of shatters her throat and makes it so that she can't talk for a few days. And I thought that was something that she didn't actually know, and it sort of came out. But I may be just remembering that wrong. So Kargren is observing her, and he's like, okay, yeah, they told us that you might be a berserker, and you are. That is some serious rage. Also, everything that I sent at you, except for the plate that I dropped on your head to knock you out, that was all an illusion, and it wasn't even a good illusion. It was something that you should have been able to see through pretty easily, and you didn't. So this is interesting and kind of strange. Clariel is just like, well, why didn't you tell me it was just a test? To which he's like, why would I fucking do that? I love that she asked that. I'm like, yeah, girl, the point of a test is to see what happens in real conditions. There's no reason for him to tell you. What are you talking about? And she says that she's never let it out of control, and then corrects herself and says almost never let it get out of control like that. And that she's then really specifies saying, I've never hurt a person, which you can tell that she is a little bit freaked out at the fact that she's like capable of that, when she has up to now been sort of telling herself, I think, to comfort herself, that, oh, I just ripped a boar apart that was trying to hurt me. It's not a big deal because I didn't hurt anybody, like a person. And I'm sure I wouldn't react the same way to a person because it hasn't actually been tested yet. And he says that the rage and the violence are an indicator of an affinity with free magic, which is governed by emotion and raw will. All those who have the blood of the five have some natural ability with free magic, but it is usually counterbalanced by an innate connection and understanding of the charter, a desire to be part of its all-encompassing nature. Tell me, do you like to be alone? Yes. You would prefer to be alone than to be in company? Yes, but I do not feel alone, not in the forest. I feel part of it, though I may have no company save the beasts and the birds. But in this city I feel surrounded and seek solitude, or I would if anyone would let me. And he says free magic often appeals to the solitary, those who wish to order their lives without the constraint of others. The rage is similar in that it throws off the constraints of your normal self, your normal physicality, rationality, and emotion. In fact, it is possible that the berserk state is itself a form of free magic or is derived from some ancient effect of that magic. And I should mention, when she finally sits up and gets up onto a bench, she remembers that she threw this bench and can't figure out how she could possibly have done that because this bench weighs like 3 times what she weighs. And now she's looking at it and like remembering an image of herself tossing the thing, which is pretty crazy. And yeah, I feel like that would be particularly disturbing. Not only realizing that you go into almost a fugue state in your rage and you lose control of yourself, but also that as you lose control, your strength has also tripled, maybe more. And therefore, in that state, you are capable of doing much, much, much more damage than you would ordinarily do. So it's not just that her rage is easier to access or closer to the surface or just like, in those ways more dangerous in the way that it would be like, I think what I had been trying to think how to put this. I think what I had been thinking was that when she went into these states, that she simply had a closer connection to the kinds of rage that many of us experience maybe once or twice in our lives. That it was, she somehow had more access to a state of mind that for many of us is a really rare thing that has to be brought on by extremely specific circumstances. So I guess I sort of saw it as like an emotional response. But finding out that her strength, her capacity for causing damage changes, shifts this from, as he puts it in the first place, it's magic. But secondly, this is much more worrisome now. I was saying how I really related because I have this rage and I do not doubt that if I were to get into any sort of fight, I would wind up in jail because I think I would lose my control and hurt somebody. But it's one thing to lose control as an ordinary person with your regular strength. You can only do so much, especially if you don't have a weapon. This bitch is picking shit up that's 400, 500 pounds and just throwing it. She's doing different damage than anybody. And that is much, much more intimidating and worrisome. And he says your magic is not necessarily evil. It's just unconstrained. And this is something that I have long sort of been wondering about because this book has had from the very beginning this idea of charter magic versus free magic. And free magic is treated as something that's really an indicator of evil, of unnaturalness. There has been an attitude about it that's when you smell it, it's like this weird metal smell. The feeling of being near it makes you feel physically ill, like it's nauseating. That for me, I'm assuming free magic is evil because of the way he's saying it. But the fact that it's called free magic instead of something else, I kept struggling with because free is a good thing. Free is something that we tend to have positive associations with. So it was really difficult for me to reconcile it being called something that is not constrained and ordered within the charter and also have it be used so negatively so much of the time. I just couldn't really understand how that could work. And honestly, what's interesting to me here is that he is saying what I've kind of been low-key wanting to think, but I have not seen evidence of free magic not being used for evil. I've not seen any characters using free magic to do anything good. It's always been a bad person using it to do bad things. So, yeah, he says that most so-called free magic constructs or entities are relics or leftovers of an ancient age, things that for various reasons were not subsumed in the making of the charter. They tend to see anything of the charter as their enemy, which is to effectively say all life. To make it worse, over time, many such entities have become impressed with a limited range of human feelings, usually the baser ones, without any counterbalancing better nature. But it is their desire for total freedom regardless of others, including other free magic creatures, that leads them to kill and wreak havoc. And this is interesting because he then asks her, she says, like, I don't want to kill and wreak havoc. I just want to be left alone. And he's like, yeah, but how far would you go for that? And she is obviously feeling like a little bit attacked here and says, I obviously wouldn't go that far because I just came from school that I went to not wanting to and suffered through classes that did not interest me in order to make my parents happy. So clearly I am obedient to a point. And Cargrin sort of is like, okay, yeah, that's fair. Maybe you've got some control and maybe that'll be enough. And she's like, enough for what? What do you mean? And he's sort of like, oh, I don't know what to tell you and not to tell you. And then he's like, well, you know what? If I tell you and this doesn't go right, I can always just Man in Black you and just fucking delete it from your brain. So, okay, I'll tell you. And he says this really casually and understandably. Clariel is just kind of like, what? And he's just like moved right along with the conversation already. But she's sitting there a little bit like, okay, first of all, because there's a minute when he makes it almost sound like, well, if it doesn't go well, I'll just kill you. And then she feels like a moment of relief as she realizes, oh no, he just means he can make me not remember it. But then after that initial feeling of relief that he doesn't mean kill her, she realizes that like, if he can make her not remember stuff, that is in and of itself a power akin to being able to kill somebody. You can delete everything about what makes somebody who they are by messing with memory. So I really like that she has this moment of just being like, okay, that's really fucked up. And we're just going to act like that was no big deal that you said that. Not only can you do it, but you'd be willing to do it and really not think much about it. And I like that within the context of this book, that kind of magic is being treated, at least by her, if not by Cargrin, with the gravity that it deserves. Because this is something that comes up so much in like the Harry Potter books that when you really stop and think about it is deeply fucked up. In Dresden Files, mental magic is black magic. You don't do things to people's minds. You just don't fucking do it. It's seen as punishable by death. And it doesn't matter if you intended good things. It doesn't matter if you were trying to help somebody. It doesn't matter. You don't fuck with people's minds. There are too many factors. There's too many things that can go wrong, misfire, cause other weird problems. And not only that, but it will affect you in turn. When you inflict that on somebody else, that magic that you just performed will kind of reflect back and affect you. And the more you do it, the more it fucks you up. And so there becomes this sort of cycle in which you become so fucked up that you become more willing to do it more and more often until you are just bending the minds of everyone around you to get everybody to do exactly what you want. And you no longer care or have empathy or are worried about what's good for them. And, you know, in Harry Potter, it's just like, you could just fucking memory charm right and left. You could just take people's minds and do whatever the fuck. And it's considered not only okay to do, it's flat out encouraged in so many cases because they're trying to keep the Wizarding World secret. They're trying to, they use it for protection and whatnot. And it's really like when you stop and think about the fact that like a backfiring memory charm basically caused a man to go kind of insane and wind up in St. Mungo's for the rest of his life. The fact that everybody's out here just messing with this magic is deeply troubling. And I love that even though Cargrin sort of just mentions it and dances right past it like it's no big deal, the author makes sure to remind us that's not totally cool. Like, that's not something that we as readers should accept as an alternative ever. That we should be concerned at the fact that maybe he would be willing to do that. And it almost makes me wonder, like, is that going to come up at all? Is there going to be a point in this book where things begin to happen and then you find out because we're seeing everything through Clariel's mind, right? So what if we're seeing everything through her mind, and all of a sudden we begin to realize that somebody deleted something, and we as readers are like, wait, why are they behaving? Did I miss something? And then we'll start to be like, oh, I didn't miss anything. Clariel missed something. Because I feel like that'd be pretty interesting to have that happen. That is also something that happens in Dresden. Spoilers. But, you know, it doesn't, like, whether or not somebody else has done that kind of thing already is not relevant. I am always a fan of seeing a similar idea carried out by a different author, because it will always look so totally different and be very interesting in its own way. But I don't know if he's planning on doing that or not, you know. So he is saying that there's a free magic creature in Belissaire. And this is when my ears perked up and I'm like, oh shit, does he mean the fucking thing that we saw in the prologue? And it turns out he does. We aren't totally sure of that yet, but shortly that is confirmed for us. And she's like, I don't understand how they could get into the city. Like, aren't they kept out by running water? And we have these aqueducts like specifically for that. And Cargrin is like, that does work against the dead, and it works against lesser free magic beings. But there are things that have more power than that. There are things that can burrow underground and go under the aqueducts and not actually have to cross over them. There are like things that can stay unseen. And he says that she can help because she has an affinity with free magic, basically by being bait. That because this free magic is so powerful in her, he says that she can almost pull it out of its shell wherever it's hiding, and that it will be sort of lured towards her because it senses something of itself in her, which is a really interesting idea. And she says, okay, so you said I was well suited for 2 reasons. What's the other one? And he says, super unexpectedly to me, I suspect a connection between the creature and Governor Kilp. Oh. Fucking drop that bomb like nothing. But until we find the creature, we cannot prove it. It didn't even occur to me that it had gotten to that point already. Or it wasn't even like that it had gotten to that point. I thought it had gotten to that point with the king, maybe, but that we weren't going to actually encounter it that quickly. That we were going to sort of like weigh and level up her abilities until she was like ready to deal with it. And instead, we find out that we may have already been in contact with somebody who was in contact with this creature within these last chapters, which is just sobering, you know? So he says that, and then he drops this other bomb. We think Clip intends for you to become queen. And Clariel's starting to just sort of lose it at this point. And every time he says a new thing, she's like, I'm sorry, what? And he's like, you got to let me get through this. How come I can't finish talking and you just keep interrupting me? And every time, finally, he's like, your cousin was supposed to tell you all of this. Why don't you know this? And she's like, oh, fuck. I just totally ditched him. Like, I told him that I would meet him after school, and then I forgot, and I just left because I needed to get the fuck out of there really, really bad. And it's kind of an amusing moment, actually, where he's just like, oh, okay. So he's asking himself at this point, even if this thing is in contact with Kilp, why would Kilp want to place a puppet on the throne rather than simply infest Kilp itself, and rule directly from the throne? Why would this thing handle it this way? And he doesn't really have an answer for that yet, but it seems like there's a suspicion that whatever the answer is, it's probably really, really bad. And he mentions something about the great charter stones, and she's like, well, what are those? And he's like, what are those? Are you fucking kidding me? He is so mad at the fact that she doesn't know what they are. And he's like, you know the rhyme, right? And she's like, oh, the rhyme. Yeah, I just thought it was like a stupid kids thing. I didn't know that it meant anything. And he's just like, holy shit, what is happening? Why? What? Fine. Okay, let me get back to the story. So, it turns out that Kilp intends for her to be queen by marrying her to Aranzo. And she is just disgusted. Like, I love this so much that this whole fucking plan appears to be in place for Kilp in his mind. And she's just hearing about it, and all of her being is just like, I don't think so. And what's so funny is that it's just kind of Kilp's bad fortune that Clariel is who she is. Because if she were a society woman, if she were somebody who was interested in upward mobility, marrying Aranzo would be seen as an enormous piece of good fortune. It would be exactly like that you don't get higher without tapping right into actual royalty than marrying somebody who is the heir to the Guild of Goldsmiths. So it looks like a super excellent deal that many other girls might be very jealous of. And that's before trying to install her as queen. So really, Kilp's plan, if Clariel wasn't who she is, might have worked out. It probably would. But he just didn't count on her being somebody who was not only so uninterested in ruling, because I think people who are uninterested in ruling are probably more common than people who are also just deeply uninterested in marriage and relationships and, you know, having societal power. So, yeah, he just didn't really anticipate that. And so he, I think, is going to wind up getting a lot more pushback than he expected. And even if Clariel wasn't who she is, her parents would likely see this as an excellent match and probably still will. And the idea that she would have her own say might not even have occurred to him. Like, he wouldn't maybe think that was even going to be a factor. So I'm just secretly like giggling to myself over the fact that Kilp just picked the wrong one. Kilp is unprepared for what this is going to really look like. So Kargren is sort of like talking to himself about whether or not she would even be recognized as Queen of the Charter. And this is particularly interesting to me because it's been mentioned before that those of royal blood are part of the Charter in this way. And I know that in the previous book, when Lyriel is worrying about how to bind the creature back inside of the spheres again, or the hemispheres, she is thinking that we don't have enough people of the blood here. And I know that I should have like realized how significant it was that she was saying it that way. But I admit, whenever it's been mentioned that like the royalty has blood that's like more connected to the Charter, I always have sort of dismissed it a little bit because I think of it the same way that we thought of how kings and queens of old were like anointed by God. I always sort of saw it as more of like a superstitious thing and not something that was actually part of the way magic worked. I assumed that this was like something that royalty maybe even spread around to make themselves seem like they were more worthy than others to rule. And the fact that we're finding out the Charter recognizes in itself kings and queens and acknowledges them, and thus they are considered legitimate by the people is a very, very different animal than what I was thinking. So that is what he is concerned about with this whole thing, is like, whether she got installed as queen or not, would the charter actually grant her that title? Would she be seen that way? And he says that like the great starter stones, might reject her. And we find out about Princess Tathiel. Princess Tathiel evidently like disappeared, and nobody knows where she is or why she went. Evidently, the Clare have seen that she will eventually come back, but it was very unclear how old she was when it was going to happen. And there's even a possibility, because the visions they've seen of her, she's been wearing armor, they may be misunderstanding and the person they saw wasn't even her. So the king has sort of become like very distracted at the fact that Tathiel is gone. And there's the possibility, because she is like likely still alive out there and still the actual heir, that the Charter Stones, while she is alive, will not accept anybody else. So this is a lot of very interesting information. What Kargren decides to do, which I think is really smart, is he makes a deal, because Clariel is just like, I just don't want to be here. I just don't want to be in Belisarius. I just want to go to the forest and do my own thing and be happy by myself. Can I just do that? And Kargren is like, you know what? Yeah. How about this? I will help you get the fuck out as soon as you help me. And I'll even give you the money that you're looking for to get out. Because she's like, she's really realizing the more she thinks about it, that she is good, like growing more and more willing to steal the money that she needs from her parents. And I am fascinated by the way that this has happened. And I wonder if this is any indication of other stuff. I'm trying to find the spot where he is talking about this. Because as soon as I can, I'm going back to Estwale. Why did you come back and what holds you back? I didn't realize how much I would hate it, is basically what she says. And then I'm going to get out of Belisarius no matter what I have to do to escape. Clariel had finally decided she would steal from her parents after all. Take a few bags of coin from the strong box, a gold bar from the stock waiting to be worked, some of the lesser jewels that were waiting to be set. So before, she's thinking about like, oh, I can't really reconcile doing that. And now it's not only like, I think I'm willing to do this, but she's planning to steal quite a lot. Like, that's a good amount of money. A bar of golds, like, yeah. So there's this moment of just her deciding that, and this is sort of hinting towards what Kargren says later in privacy to Gully, I think is what they call her. They are worried that she is somebody who eventually anybody else's will is not going to matter to her. She, because of her connection to free magic and her dealing with this rage, that she is simply going to begin to steamroller over everything that other people want. And I'm wondering if this moment of her having been like, oh, I don't want to steal. I don't want to. And then suddenly being faced with this like fate that has been outlined for her of maybe being forced to get married and be queen. All of a sudden she is like willing to set aside the worrisome ethics and morals that she was puzzling over before. Is this a sign that she is maybe capable of what he is worried about? Or is it just that she got really desperate and frightened? Because that could be it too. And I'm not wanting to really judge her on that, you know? But anyway, I found this like a little progression pretty interesting. Also, I'm trying to find the spot, cause I jumped ahead to get to that quote. Oh, right. He, he's asking her like how much she knows about this, and she's just explaining about her mother and Robin telling her that like the guild master was worried about being usurped by her mom, yada yada yada. And Cargrin is like, yeah, well, no offense to Robin, but he doesn't really know what he's talking about any more than I do. All of us are just kind of trying to guess what the fuck Kilpa's even after at this point. And he talks about the king and that there is a darkness on his mind and that he sees no joy in anything. So basically, he has deep, terrible depression and does not want the responsibility of ruling, and has decided that like he's just not going to do it. And I am sure that there is like magic behind this, but you know, as far as things that are relatable, yeah, that counts. And he wished to pass the burden on, but his daughters were dead, his grandchild lost to him, so he simply set it aside. And I don't know if we know about how his children died, or I feel like it's been mentioned, but I don't totally remember. But let's see. I'm supposed to be seeing the king the day after tomorrow to give him a kin gift. Yes, that's also of interest to us. Because so many other people have tried to get audiences and they have not been able to. And they've offered kin gifts as well. Why is it you have been able to get it out of everybody? And he also finally mentions Marl. He says there are people we have like kind of spying to see what's going on with Kilp. And Marl has been recently much more of a favorite than he used to be. He's showing up and getting like time alone with the governor. He is turning up much more frequently than usual. And we've been sort of tracking him and using spells to like sense what the deal is with him. And we've all noticed, first of all, excuse me, that he has the taint of free magic on him. And secondly, that the path he uses to get to the castle is the path that avoids all of the charter stones. So this is, you know, starting to really feel like it's got some weight here. So Clariel is talking about not helping and just bailing, stealing this money that she needs, getting the fuck out of here. And Kilp is like, I mean, you can try, but your family aren't the only ones that have guards looking out for you and watching you. Kilp's people are on the roads. He has a plan for you. And if you think he's just going to let you wander off, and if you think that he doesn't have people keeping an eye on you all the time, you're being stupid. So he makes the deal to pay her 250 gold bezants, which she thinks is asking too much, and that she's maybe like overstepped it a little bit. And Cargrin immediately says done, and she's like so stunned that he agreed to it. And there's a moment of her being like, I really wanted what I wanted, but now I'm sort of like worried that maybe I don't want it the way that I thought, because you're telling me that I can just get it, and I, rather than reacting with total elation and excitement, am low-key frightened of this. And oh, is that the most relatable shit ever. So then we have a scene with Jaciel, Clariel's mother. And this is really interesting, guys. I love this. This reminds me weirdly of Little Women. I don't know how many of you guys have read that, but Jo March, who is, you know, the main protagonist, she has a real temper. And she has a lot of guilt surrounding that temper, and the fact that she like will lash out and do hurtful things or say hurtful things and wants to be better, but just has such a hard time. And her mother is this really gentle, kind woman who Jo feels inadequate in comparison to. And eventually one day her mother like sits her down to talk to her about her temper. And Jo says something about how, well, I just don't think you understand what it's like. I am constantly, it feels like practically possessed by some other being that wants to hurt people and would enjoy doing it. And her mother's like, oh, hey, guess what? I am exactly that way. I have just started to get a hold of myself and can control it now. But I am enraged every day of my life. And Jo is fucking floored by this. Like, she just had no idea because you cannot tell. And it's unfortunate because Jaciel and Clariel obviously do not have the loving, honest relationship that Jo March has with her mother, where they can actually talk about this. Like, Clariel can't tell, she hasn't told her mother by this point that she even is a berserker. Like, she realizes from the context of what her mother's explaining to her that her mother is. And that's likely where she gets it from. But she isn't able to explain that to her mother because her mother does not want to talk about it. And so it's this awful like moment of realizing that you have something that you could bond over, that you could be like supporting one another through, but one of you is unwilling to meet the other and have that conversation. And there's something so sad about that, you know, that this is her mother. This is, and, you know, I should mention Clariel is like laid up at the end of this book after getting pretty badly injured, and her mom doesn't come to see her. And it's like the kind of thing that her father sort of makes excuses for why her mother didn't come and is like trying to act like, oh, she's just really busy with work. And there's a part of me that's like, I know it seems as if maybe she just doesn't care about Clariel. But what if the thing is that she is worried going and seeing her daughter injured, she's afraid is going to set her off and cause her to hurt somebody. And she's just realizing that she needs to separate herself from that. Like, Jaciel has such supreme control of herself so much of the time. And that is something you cultivate. What if she's a really great goldsmith because she's funneling all of that fucking rage into something else? And that's the only way that she's able to fucking keep her head on straight. And that's why she is always, it's not to do with the fact that she doesn't care about her family. It doesn't have anything to do with not loving her daughter. It's the only way to sort of keep shit contained. If that's what it is, I'm going to feel so bad for everybody involved, because if she had just talked to Clariel about it, she would have found a daughter who deeply understood and would have a lot of compassion for her instead of resenting her. But that's all conjecture. So Jaciel is trying to have the conversation with Clariel about going to school and asks her about if she's met the guildmaster's son. Clariel has a very strong reaction to being asked this because she senses in this the plan already like percolating. And she kind of bites her mother's head off and says something about how, like, I know that you don't care about me. You care about me getting in to see the king so that you can see this stupid thing that you want to copy, which I think might be a magical thing, and that there's more to that than Clariel knows, but that's beside the point. And Jaciel finally, because Clariel's like saying something to her mother about how, I can't believe you won't let me go off and do my own thing when you ran away from home so that you could be a goldsmith. And Jaciel's like, that is not what happened. Sit the fuck down. Jaciel gets pissed. Like, everybody who's sitting at the table with them eating is like, so it's really nice out today, right? Like, they're all just, they go dead silent, and then they like try and act like everything's cool. And Jaciel's finally like, oh, guys, take your plates and go. Get the fuck out of here. And everybody's like, okay. And they just fucking sprint for the door. So Jaciel tells Clariel about what happened with her father. she had a brother named Tyrael who was the Abhorsen in waiting. And Tyrael was really, really into what he did. He was very interested in going into death and exploring and figuring out how to do things. But unfortunately, he went too far. He was a bit too overeager. And he came back out of death one day, and she could see from looking at him, as she puts it, his eyes were strange, reflecting no light. I saw that he was no longer my brother, but instead something that wore his flesh like a coat. And it saw that I knew, and it attacked me. So she kills her brother to protect herself, but it's still her brother's body. And her father just straight up will not believe that that Jaciel is telling the truth, because Jaciel has had a history of having a terrible temper and getting into fights with Tyrael especially. And so this just feels like she lashed out, and now she's trying to cover up the fact that she finally snapped and went too far, and kicks her out, basically, calling her a kinslayer and a murderer. And Jaciel explains this to Clariel and then stomps out without eating. And Clariel is just sitting there fucking floored at all of this information, and is realizing she's telling me this and she doesn't know that I could relate, and she's never going to be willing to talk to me about it. I just need to get the fuck out of here. I really do need to go and do this assignment and work with them so that I can get the tools I need to get out. So we speed ahead. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to jump a little bit. We get the whole crew together. And by the whole crew, I mean Kargrin, Roban, a woman named Ghislaine, who I believe they call Gully, and her cousin Balasiel. I can't remember his name. But he winds up turning up at the last second, fucking out of breath and shit. Balatiel. And he has the pipes instead of the bells, and is going to, be of some assistance, but he doesn't have a whole lot of training. And really, when it comes down to it, the instructions for both of them is, if shit gets real, run. Please leave, because you're going to either get in the way or you're just going to make shit worse. We don't need you. You're here for the first steps, and that's it. So they head out to where this dude lives with his shark tooth curtain on his front door. And the description of this place is really wild. It's extremely hard for me to picture. It's like there's just these rocks that are divided by deep channels, and some of them it's somewhat deep, so it's a rut, I think, but it's dry. And some of them are really deep and filled with water. And to get to it in the first place, you have to cross this span of rock that is sometimes deep underwater. And they're here at a point where the tide is pretty low, but not completely out. So it's about up to their chests sometimes. And they have to cross this in order to get over there. And it's just way more intense than I expected, and fascinated me. I just the whole way this was described, I was just holy shit, he could just have had this guy live on the beach. But no, it's a really specific thing that he's thinking of. And I'm did he see someplace like this? And that's where he got this idea? Or where did this even come from? Because I just can't imagine it really. And they don't even quite get to his front door before they get attacked. And the first part of the attack is a human who's using arrows. And Balatiel got right through the shoulder. Thankfully, it's not a little bit off to the side, because it could have pierced his heart or pierced an artery. And he winds up coming out okay. But it's a really sudden thing. And the two of them, to their credit, when they finally begin getting closer to Meryl's door, they start noticing that this is like the perfect place for an ambush. They're looking around like, okay, I don't like this. So they like see it coming a little bit. And then they turn around and they realize that all of their people who are under a spell to make them like unremarkable enough to be ignored, that, oh, I'm sorry, I knocked the thing over. They realize that they can't see them anymore. And so like all of the things that they had sort of laid in place and thought was going to have their back, none of it's actually where it's supposed to be. And it turns out, we find out later, that whole crew got held up by other magical protections that were in place. So Clariel, all of a sudden feels this like voice in her head. And it's this amazing moment where she's like, she's saying, "Where are you? Face us." And she's like spinning around trying to fight the thing, and there's nothing there, but she can hear it. And it says something interesting. So you are Clariel. And she can feel it in her head. And she tries to use the charter to defend herself the way that Kargrin had told her to do, because the charter is anathema to these free magic creatures. So if she's able to pull those symbols into her own mind and use them as a shield, it will pull back from that. But that does not work. The Charks barely flare to life. They don't even quite like connect in her mind the way they're meant to form actual spells. And the creature is being like, "You don't need the charter, girl. You know how to do shit without needing any of that. All these marks and spells, all you need to do is want something, and you can make that shit happen. What are you doing with this? This is nonsense." And it's like really a quite convincing argument. So this thing starts to head towards Belle, and it has, the description of this thing is bonkers, you guys. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it doesn't even have feet. It's just like kind of standing on these 2 points and like made of bone. And it's got like 2 elbows. So it's like jointed in this weird way and has like backward claws. It's crazy. The descriptions this guy has for creatures are unparalleled in my experience. So poor Robin tries to fight back. It does nothing. He has a charter marked sword, but it doesn't do anything. Clariel has just a regular knife, and that shit literally melts. And she's like, completely disabled here, watching this thing about to try and kill Belle. And Clariel's like, no, I absolutely fucking not. And grabs the spike of its leg, which is like a blade, and cuts her hand while she's like holding it back, which like, bitch, ugh, that is love. That is some Catelyn Stark-esque love. And she holds this thing back, and it says to her, "You are strong, but not strong enough." And she's like, "You know what? You're absolutely right." And she reaches down for her rage, and it does something she didn't expect. And this fucking thing definitely didn't expect, which is she basically bitch slaps the thing to the floor, stands on its neck, spits in its face, and then is like, "I think you're mine now." And the thing is like, "I guess I am." Like, it's just this really sudden, complete about face. Nobody saw this coming. And she herself is just like, "Whoa, wait, what? Oh." And this thing starts begging her, like literally crying, like within her mind, this like terrible fear, as outside of her, the others begin laying the spell down to trap it and hold it. And it's telling her how it's going to like be like it's in this prison and they will bind me. You know what it's like to be contained against your will. Help me, sister, is what it says to her. And Clariel listens to it, because even though this thing is like evil and is about to just murder for funsies, she feels like an affinity for it. And it's a conscious creature, and she can't get behind the binding of it in that way. And she even thinks of it as if she is being bound rather than the creature, because they are starting to meld in this way. And it tells her that its name is Azimanil. And Clariel, when she hears its name, just lets go. It's like it having a name for some reason is the thing that sends her over the edge, where she's just like, I can't do it. And it's a second too early. Kargren was almost able to bind it. And they are all so frustrated. This thing goes diving into the stone because it can travel that way and gets away. And everybody is just like, fuck! Oh my God, we were so close. But they don't seem to realize she let it go. I don't think they have any idea how strong she is or what just happened. I think they think she had pushed herself to the very limits and simply could not sustain it any further, rather than realizing that that was a conscious choice that she made, which she could easily have continued to do for God knows how long. She could have maybe subsumed it completely and taken it in as part of herself permanently, and it would have been nothing. But it does not quite go that far here. So she collapses, essentially, and she wakes up, and we find out that Kargren had really his job cut out for him in laying the healing spells on her hands because of all of the cuts that she sustained. It just worked. He managed to do it, but it took so much more effort, and it didn't even work the way it should. She should have been almost completely healed. And instead she's got partially healed cuts that still need bandages and are going to need to continue healing naturally instead of being completely healed magically. So she just has, in her own way, this resistance to the charter. And they didn't even get the guy who was shooting the arrows, the assassin. They found the crossbow, Gully did, but they are not, they don't really have a lot to work with here. They are really interested, Kargren especially, in the fact that she held the creature. That is something beyond the physical strength of any mortal. It was her will that held it, and that is how free magic sorcerers are made. If she should meet the creature again and dominate it, find how simple it would be to wield the powers the creature would give her, it is a great risk as long as that creature is free. And one of them is the Abhorsen, she's related to them. It makes sense that she has this ability. And Kargren's no. The Abhorsens bind them, free magic creatures and the dead, and send them away. They don't take them over and make them into slaves. That's what she could do. That's different. And Gully's okay, but she didn't do that. She was trying to save somebody. So that makes her different, right? And Kargren's it does right now. But none of these sorcerers that deal with free magic usually start off as bad people. They're not usually totally selfish, evil human beings. They evolve into that over time. So that's something we need to keep a fucking eye on. And the next day, she has a visit with her father, and he tells her the version of the story he was told, and yada yada. And eventually, let's see. Oh, right. So Gullen comes in, or Gully. Yeah. And it turns out, first of all, Gully is a black woman with a bald head. So I cannot not think of the Dora Milaje from Black Panther when I imagine her. I just absolutely think of her. The woman who played Michonne on Walking Dead. I cannot remember her name. But she tells Clariel, so, long story short, I am also a berserker. And it was a problem. Let me tell you. She's like, yeah, I had like family around me to literally hold me back, or else I don't know what I would have done a few times. And it's gotten to a point now that I have managed it due to a lot of reading and some exercises that do a lot of good, but they're tedious, but I promise they work. And she gives her this book to read. And I really liked this, that Clariel like takes the book and is very much like, thank you. Like seriously appreciate somebody reaching out to her about this and giving her tools. Like she's not reacting with the, I don't need this. I can figure it out myself. She's realizing finally she can't figure this out herself. This is some shit she doesn't understand. And she kind of thought she had the measure of it. And it's like just taken over so completely a couple times that she's finally humbled a bit and just being like, all right, yeah, I need fucking help. So I will take it. So there is, are still searching for this creature. They have not tracked it down yet, but they seem to be of the opinion that they will be able to do that without her. So they are going to hold up their end of the bargain and help her get the fuck out of here, which is really interesting. And they are kind of blaming themselves for not checking out the islet a little bit earlier. They feel like they should have, and that this thing got too much of a hold. And it's just more powerful in general than any of them really expected. So Ghislaine says, the king is not a difficult man. You're going to be visiting him tomorrow, but I will talk to you about that after we get this berserk issue out of the way. And Gully is not blaming her for calling it today. She's like, you did what you needed to do, but you need to learn how to master it so that once you call it, it's not completely off the leash. And it wasn't only the berserk fury that troubled Clariel. It was her experience with the free magic creature, the sense of triumph she had felt when she had entered the creature's mind, when it had begun to bend to her will. She'd never felt anything like it before. Nothing so ecstatic, not even after a day stalking a deer and then the perfect true flight of her arrow striking exactly the right spot. And she is just kind of shaken at how much she liked it. Which, yeah. Girl, there is nothing quite like realizing that there is a streak in you of something really dark. And I think a lot of us have come across that in our personality, where there's just like, there's a part of us that enjoys hurting in ways like, we'll say for good reasons. We'll say we enjoy hurting bad people. It doesn't make a difference though. You still enjoy hurting. You still enjoy doing something that's like causing pain to some, like you can make it justified, but it shouldn't be something that we like. And yet a lot of us do. And we just have to find ways to direct it so that it does the least harm to the people who are innocent, but like still, and Gully says, we'll help you leave after you see the king. Let me tell you the manner of your presentation tomorrow. And the captain keeps speaking, and Clariel is listening like halfway, but she keeps thinking, as it says, remembering the moment when she felt the raw power within the creature. Power waiting to be called upon, waiting to be directed, waiting to be used. Power waiting for her. And that was the end of the chapter. And I was like, oh, Clariel, stop. Girl, what are you doing? Oh, I am worried about her. This is so interesting, guys. I am into it. So I have to wrap this up. I'm over time. But thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. I cannot wait to find out what happens next. I'm going to check and see when the next episode is, and hopefully I can listen to it really soon. But thank you all again so much for listening. I hope you're enjoying it, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.